Ever wonder how just adding more can make something totally different? Not just bigger or more complicated, but like different at its core.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question.
Well, that's what we're diving into today, a paper from back in '72 called More is Different
Okay.
by P.W. Anderson.
More is different from 1972.
Yeah, it's old, but the ideas are still super relevant even now. We're going to be getting into this concept of broken symmetry.
All right, broken symmetry.
Might sound a bit physicsy, but I promise it's way cooler than a physics exam. Haha.
Oh boy.
Okay, so think about it. We usually try to understand stuff by like breaking it down, right,
Hmm.
into the simplest parts.
Right, taking it apart.
Exactly, reductionism, right?
Hmm.
And most scientists would agree that's a good method.
Yeah, makes sense.
But what's really interesting is what happens when you try to go the other way, building UP from those parts. That's where it gets kind of crazy.
Yeah, like just because you know what the ingredients are doesn't mean you can bake the cake, right?
Haha, exactly. And with really complex systems, sometimes that cake just doesn't want to bake the way you'd think. And the paper actually uses a really simple example, the ammonia molecule. Have you ever thought about what an ammonia molecule looks like?
Not really.
It's weird. It's like this little pyramid shape, and
Hmm.
according to some basic physics, it shouldn't even really exist in that form.
Really? So that's where this broken symmetry idea comes in.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like this little molecule is breaking the rules somehow.
Huh, interesting. So how's it doing that?
Well, it's like it's constantly flipping between two different pyramid shapes.
Right.
Yeah, like super rapidly, driven by quantum mechanics, which is a
Right.
whole other deep dive.
Oh, right.
But the key is this flipping averages things out. So even though it should have this electrical imbalance, this thing called a dipole moment, because of the flipping, it ends up being neutral.
Oh, okay. So it's like it's hiding its true self.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a magician's trick, but on a molecular level.
Wow, that's really
It
wild.
is. And this is a perfect illustration of how something can act completely different as a whole compared to just looking at its individual parts. It's like the behavior emerges from the complexity.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not that the ammonia molecule is actually breaking the laws of physics, it's just finding a clever way around them.
Precisely. And this loophole, this broken symmetry, is where things get really interesting, especially as we start to look at more and more complex systems.
Hmm.
But you also mentioned something earlier about stationary states needing the same symmetry as the laws governing them.
Hmm.
What did you mean by that?
Oh, yeah. It's like imagine the universe has these rules, right? And for something to exist in a stable state, it has to kind of play by those rules.
Okay, I'm following.
But then you have these systems like our ammonia molecule that find these loopholes. They're still following the rules, but they're doing it in a way that we wouldn't expect.
That's such a cool way to think about it. So it's not about breaking the rules, it's about bending them, finding those sneaky workarounds.
Exactly. And these workarounds, these broken symmetries, they're what lead to some of the most mind-blowing phenomena in the universe.
Okay, now you've got me really curious. What kind of phenomena are we talking about? Give me an example.
Well, let's take a look at larger molecules. Like, consider phosphorus trifluoride. It's similar in structure to ammonia, but way bigger, and it's theoretically possible for it to flip like ammonia, but it's so large we never actually observe it.
So it's like it's stuck.
Exactly. It's like it's frozen in this broken symmetry state. And this has real implications. Think about sugar. You know how all sugar in living things is left-handed?
Left-handed sugar. I've never even thought about sugar having a handedness.
It's a great example of how even a tiny difference, like in the arrangement of atoms, can have huge E effects. When we make sugar in a lab, we get a mix of left and right-handed molecules. But life, for some reason, only uses the left-handed kind.
That's fascinating. So that handedness, that chirality, it matters. It's a perfect example of more is different. A tiny change leads to huge implications. But why? Why does life prefer one type over the other?
That's a question that's puzzled scientists for ages, and it really shows the limits of just breaking things down to understand them. We know the chemical structure of sugar, but when it comes to life, those basic explanations sometimes aren't enough.
So we've gone from a shape-shifting molecule to left-handed sugar. Where else does this broken symmetry idea pop up?
Let's talk crystals. They seem like the definition of order and symmetry, but even they come from this idea of more is different.
Now that one seems counterintuitive.
Uh,
How can a crystal, something so ordered, be an example of broken symmetry?
think about it. At the atomic level, crystals are made of a jumbled mess of atoms. But when they grow, they arrange themselves into these crazy repeating patterns, from simple cubes to those intricate snowflakes. order from what should be a completely random mix.
Like those mesmerizing videos where you see a pattern emerging from what looks like chaos. How does that tie back to broken symmetry, though?
It's about the system finding stability with lower symmetry than the individual pieces. It's like the universe is a rule bender. It finds loopholes to create these amazing things we see.
So even the most ordered structures come from a little rule bending at a lower level. That's wild. And I have a feeling we've only scratched the surface of this more is different idea, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. From superconductivity, where materials conduct electricity with zero resistance.
Wait, zero resistance? That sounds impossible.
Oh, right. It's mind-blowing. But it happens at super low temperatures. And then there's how information is stored and processed, like in DNA.
So DNA is more than just a molecule.
Way more. The implications of this concept are huge, but the main point is it's not about actually breaking the fundamental laws of physics.
Right. It's about finding those loopholes.
Exactly. It's about systems finding those stable configurations that actually have lower symmetry.
This is definitely one of those ideas that the more you think about it, the bigger it gets.
Oh, for sure. It makes you look at the world a little differently.
It really does.
Yeah.
And we're just getting started. When we come back, we'll dive even deeper into these mind-blowing examples and explore just how far this more is different idea can go. All right, so we're back and ready to go deeper into this more is different idea. And you were about to tell us how DNA is a great example of this. Something about it being more than just a molecule.
Way more. It's like the blueprint, the code for a whole organism, you know?
So like a biological hard drive storing tons of information.
Exactly. But it's not just the arrangement of those base pairs, it's also about time. How DNA is read and made into proteins, the timing of everything, it's all in a specific order, a rhythm.
Right, like that temporal regularity you mentioned before. It's like the universe just loves patterns, not just in space, but in time, too.
Exactly. Our heart's beating, the day and night cycle, life depends on those patterns in time.
It's true. Our sleep cycles, the seasons, our bodies are like symphonies of rhythms.
And there are theories that say this rhythm is super important for things like cells developing, growth, even memory.
So we have this order in space with crystals, and now order in time with how life works. This more is different thing works on multiple levels, but how does this order in time even happen when we're talking about billions of things interacting?
That's what keeps scientists guessing. Imagine trying to predict how a flock of birds will move. Each bird has simple rules, but together they create these amazing patterns.
I love that analogy. It makes you wonder where that organization comes from. Is it already in each bird, or does it just happen when they're together?
$1 million question, right. And it's not just birds or DNA. Think of a whole organism, different cells, each with a job, all working to make one living thing. That's a whole other level of organization.
It's crazy when you really think about it. Like an orchestra, every instrument playing its part perfectly. And that's what makes life, well, life.
Exactly. The whole is more than just the parts. It's something totally new that comes from those parts interacting over time.
This is where my brain starts to hurt a little. In a good way. It seems like more is different, applies to everything, not just physics or chemistry, ecosystems, how people act, even consciousness.
Absolutely. It's a new way to see the world, a reminder that just breaking things down isn't always enough. We have to look at the whole picture, at how everything interacts.
And that's what's so important about what Anderson was saying. We can't always build up from the simple parts, but breaking things down is still useful. We need both, right?
For sure. Think about genetics. We've learned so much about medicine and biology from understanding DNA. Even if we can't build a human from scratch, knowing the code is huge.
It's like we need a microscope, A&D a telescope, to see the tiny details and the big picture at the same time.
Exactly. We have to admit that no one perspective, no one field can explain everything. We need new tools, new ways of thinking for each level of complexity.
Which makes me think, are scientists basically just really bad at dealing with complexity?
Well, in a way, yes. But that's what makes it so exciting. We're constantly having to come up with new ways to understand the world around us. It's a challenge, but it's also incredibly rewarding.
And sometimes that means admitting that we don't know everything.
Exactly. Sometimes the biggest discoveries come from saying, I don't know, but let's find out.
Humility in the face of the unknown. I like it. It's like we need a whole new science for each level of complexity, right?
It's true. The tools we use to study tiny atoms won't help us understand something as big and messy as the global economy.
It's like that quote, the rich are different from us. And someone said, but yeah, they have more money. Sometimes it's not just about having more, it's a whole different thing.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool about studying complex systems. We have to admit we don't have all the answers.
So where do we go from here? What are we supposed to do with this idea?
It's a reminder to pay attention. Look for those unexpected patterns, those things that pop up when things get complex. Don't be afraid to question what you think you know. Sometimes the biggest discoveries come from seeing things in a new way.
It's like that saying, the real voyage of discovery is not about finding new lands, but about seeing with new eyes.
Mhm.
This whole deep dive has been like that.
I agree.
We started with this idea, more is different, and look where it's taken us. From tiny molecules to how life itself works. It's challenged how we usually think and shown us a new way of looking at the world.
It really has.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into more is different, I have one last thing for you to think about. What's an example of more is different that you see in your own life or your work? What complex things get you curious? What happens when simple things combine and make something totally unexpected? Think about it. You might be surprised by what you find. Until next time, keep those brains working and stay curious.